Hey everybody, this is Karen here at All Fired Up, ready to start our wet etching project. I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to go ahead and get on. If you can comment that you're watching, I see one person is watching. That would be great, so I know whether or not I'm leaving anybody in the dust. Okay, so let's see. We're still at one person watching. Oh, now we're up to 2, that's good. We have 2 more that are probably going to come in now and a couple people that are going to watch it later. By the way, if you're ever interested in any of these workshops and you can't make the live event, it is, hi Patricia, thanks for saying you're watching. Anyway, it is always available on Facebook afterwards. So you can, and we have the kits still available through our website. So you can do these workshops at a later date if you're not able to come in or join us on the video. All right, so today, like I said, we're doing the wet etching, and this is a fun process. Years ago, I was an art teacher, and we would do etching. When I was an art student, I did a lot of etching as a printmaking technique, and then when I took pottery and taught pottery, we did the etching technique, and we called it sgraffito, which means it's Italian for scratch. It's basically the same technique. The great thing that's an improvement about the wet etching was that the sgraffito was very dusty because we would do it on a dry surface. And this is a little bit, because we're going to do it wet, first of all, it's less messy, and also the edges of some of the lines, it's a little bit easier to get nice crisp edges. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and divide up our colors. You're going to want to set the black and probably the red aside. The colors that you're using to accent, I keep pulling this back up, sorry about that. The colors that you're using to accent it last, we'll just set those aside. I accented with a little bit of black on mine and a little bit of red. And if you see really close up, I did go back in with one of the colors that I used as my undercolor and added some snowflakes. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work on our background color. And the way that sgraffito works is it's a layer of paint underneath and then another layer of paint on top. And then while that is wet, we are going to take our scratching tool. By the way, make sure you have that. We're going to take our scratching tool and we're going to scratch into it. And what will happen is that in most places, it will scratch through that top layer that's still kind of wet. Like right in here, the very pale green that's called sweet pea was the top layer. And while it was still wet, I scratched through. And the little boy blue that I had underneath is what showed through. The reason I say is in most places is because that's what typically will happen. And I'm going to tell you right now, when things don't go ideally, what might happen so that you don't panic if it happens to you while you're working, even though I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Sometimes when it's larger areas, like right here, this whole white area should have been the little boy blue. But when I was scratching at it, I just was a little bit too zealous and I got all the way down to the bare pottery. If that should happen to you, don't worry about it because I will touch it up with clear glaze before we put it in the kiln. I'll check everybody's pieces and make sure that there's no raw pottery showing through. And I'll touch up any spots where there are. And you won't be able to tell that it was not done intentionally at all. Very helpful to that particular problem is the fact that since this is a snow scene, you're going to have white somewhere else in your design, and that will make it look on purpose. So back to the very first step. The very first step is going to be painting the background. So I'm going to choose my colors that I want for my background. And like I said, I was dividing out my paints. I set my red and my black aside. And I'm gonna put my lighter colors in one group, and for me, that's white. Probably a lot of you have chosen white. Sweet pea. I like the sweet pea. It's very subtle. It's really a white with just kind of like a moss green tinge to it. And then my other lightest color is Tahiti teal. Okay? If you have more or less lighter colors, that's fine. It's just that we want the underneath to be darker colors. So I want to make sure that I'm setting aside my lighter colors for my top coat, and I'm using my darker colors for my undercoat. So my undercoat, I am doing Little Boy Blue, because it's just like my favorite blue. Little Boy Blue, and I'm doing Jumping Juniper, which is a darker turquoise, and I'm doing Mint. Now I could paint the whole thing a solid color and just choose one of those and paint the whole thing a solid color if I wanted to. Being a little bit more elaborate, I'm going to show you guys a technique that creates a fade from one color to the next. And let me move these up this way so you guys can see them a little bit. So the mint is the most green, the turquoise is kind of a blue-green, and the Little Boy Blue is obviously a blue. I'm going to use those in that order. That way it fades nicely from one to the next. You can go a little more distant, like a yellow next to a green would work because they blend together. I always tell the kids when I'm working with them, if it's on the next to each other on the color wheel or the rainbow, then it will work next to each other on the fade. Okay, so I'm gonna get my paint squirted out a little bit because I don't have the cool little cups that you guys have. And I'm going to tilt the camera down so that you guys can see it. Just a little bit easier. I may tilt it up a little bit later in the video, but you know, I'm not that photogenic to begin with, and it's more important to see what's going on the piece. So tilting that down. I've got my palette of paints here. I'm going to get my biggest brush. My biggest brush is kind of pretty because this is the one I borrowed from my boss. You guys will have a flat, larger brush in your piece or in your packet, and that will work out just fine. I'm going to dip it in the Little Boy Blue, and I'm going to go start across here. I am not dipping these pieces like we usually dip everything. You know, when you come into the studio, we tell you that that we will dip the pieces in a clear glaze or a clear paint, and that everything will turn out hard and shiny. With this process, if we dip the whole piece, it ends up being too thick and the paint resists a little bit, which is not a good thing. So I will be touching up areas of raw pottery, but I won't be, or raw bisque, but I won't be dipping the whole thing. So I'm mentioning that so that you bear in mind that you do want to cover the entire piece, front and back, in at least 3 coats. By the way, if you guys are not painting with me, you can go ahead and start doing this. So you're going to start with your darker color. Then once I get as much of my darker color as I want, one coat, I'm going to do something called double dipping. Let me put the palette up here so you can see that. And that's where I dip half in one color and half in the other color. And you will notice that I did not clean my brush off. You don't have to clean your brush off here. It kind of just blends a little bit more if you don't. So that's an okay thing. So now I'm going to go back and forth. Every single time I do one of these workshops, no matter how much I plan, I always forget some supply when I'm sitting down here and don't realize until the camera is on. And I just realized that the supply that I forgot is I did not give myself a paper towel. So I will do a coat of this, and then I will hop up and scoot across the studio and get a paper towel. So I'm loading my brush again because I want a little bit more on there. And you can see how it's starting to blend just by nature of both of them being on the brush at the same time and going back and forth a couple times. The other thing is when we go ahead and do additional coats, that will blend it even more because I'm gonna show you a technique to make that happen. So now this time I'm dipping the brush without cleaning it, just in the turquoise, which is my next color. And I'm gonna work my way up with the turquoise. Oops. Now I'm gonna dip it in turquoise again and just keep going. I don't know if you guys could see me, I dipped it in the wrong color, but they're close enough that I just kind of wiped it off a little bit and it'll be fine. And now I'm backing back up into that blue just a little bit to kind of blend it, adding a little bit more turquoise. And I can change to my next color whenever I would like. That is totally artist choice kind of thing. There's no wrong way to do this. So I think right about here is where I'm ready to go to mint. So I'm going to do that double loading again. This time I'm going to load it in the turquoise. And then I'm going to also load it in the mint. And you can see that brush. Let me get it a little more loaded for you to see. You can see that brush has a generous amount of both colors on it. Now when I do it, it's going to start blending. And I'll switch all to mint again without without cleaning my brush off. Okay. Now I want to let that dry. We're going to do some more coats, but I'm going to let that dry. While it's drying, I'm going to flip my plate over and I'm going to pick a color to do the background. And this one you can see, pay no attention to this part, I didn't really think it through, and that is raw pottery. I want it to be nice and shiny, so we're going to not do it that way this time. But this here, I did the edge in turquoise. I think on this one, I'm going to do the edge in the little boy blue. I can rinse my brush out at this point or not. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to go ahead and do, because my brush didn't have very much paint on it anyway. And I'm going to go ahead and do a whole coat here. I may have to load. Now, you all can do whatever you would like. If this were a kid's class, I would have like rainbow things happening on the background. Those guys would never paint the whole thing just a solid color. If you are a child at heart, or just really like colorful things, feel free to paint as many colors on the background as you would, or on the back of the plate as you would like. Just make sure that the whole thing is covered. Being a little bit expressive with my brush strokes, it doesn't matter, it will show up nice and even because I'm going to do 3 coats. If you've ever painted anything in the studio before, you've probably heard us give our little pottery spiel, and we've told you that 3 coats will typically make it solid. The only color that I would be, probably the only color that you might be using for your background or for the back of your plate today, you could have used maybe red. The red is a little bit streaky, so I would do 4 coats on the red, on the back for the, if you do the red, just so that it turns out nice and solid. Some people are very, very particular. I have a feeling one of my coworkers, she knows who she is would probably do 4 coats of any color. It's really up to you, and it's not something that you have to do tonight. Like you could do the process tonight, the wet etching process tonight, and before you bring it back to the studio, you could just add another coat onto the back just to be safe. So I'm seeing something here. I'm not sure if you guys will be able to see it in the camera, but there's a spot right here where I have put paint and it is not sticking. That's what's called a hard spot in the clay. It's not anything that I am doing wrong, and if it happens to you, you're not crazy, it really is happening. What happens is when they pour the molds for the pottery pieces, the bisque pieces, when they use a liquid clay called slip, and when they pour them, sometimes that liquid clay goes in really fast and hard and hits a specific spot on the piece, and that area ends up a lot denser, and for whatever reason, when it's denser, it's smoother, and when it's smoother, it doesn't take the paint as well. If you come across a hard spot on your piece when you're painting, what you should do is paint a thin coat like I did, and then just kind of tap the paint on, and you'll see that when you tap the paint on, it will go on a lot easier. Okay? So that's one coat all the way through the process. I'm gonna let that dry for a second. I'm gonna hop up just a tiny bit and grab some paper towels and be right back. If I were one of those executives who could had the power to fix and improve things on Facebook, I think one of the things that I would do is be able to press pause on these live videos so that you don't have to endure the not so exciting spots in the video. Okay, while that side is drying, I'm gonna flip this over, and it's okay if it's not quite dry. We're gonna do a couple more coats and that'll get it nice, plenty thick enough. So I'm gonna reload some of my colors because I'm running out a little bit. And I'm gonna do the same process again. Over here I've got my little boy blue that I'm using. Yeah, that is the color I'm using. Oops, sorry. I have to actually work this way because that's the way my brain works. I got my little boy blue. I'm gonna do another coat of that. If it's not dry, I'm gonna wait a second. It will dry pretty quickly. Now this time, I'm gonna move my line over just a tiny bit. And the reason that I'm doing that is because when you overlap those joints like that, it's kind of like mowing the lawn. You don't want those longer pieces sticking up. So if you overlap and you move back and forth a little bit in where you're double loading the brush, then that just makes the transition from one color to the next even more subtle. And here I'm doing that double loading again. You can see I've double loaded the brush, and I'm moving it just down a little bit from where I did it before. Brush back and forth, that'll blend it a little bit. If I've got too much paint on my brush, I might want to just kind of wipe it off a little bit. Now I'm going to move just to the turquoise. There we go. Blending back and forth just a little bit more there, because I want to. And now I'm going to do my turquoise color. And I'm going to put that in a slightly different spot than before. So I'm double dipping. I'm dipping in the turquoise, and I'm dipping in the mint. I've got turquoise and mint. And this one I'm going to move up just a little bit. And like I said, when that all when this is fired and all of those colors are seen together layered on top of each other, it's gonna create a more subtle fade. Now I've got my nice blended one. You can't even see where it goes from one to the next. That'll start to happen as you get more coats on. It'll be harder to see, which really looks wonderful when it's done. All right, and there's my second coat. I'm gonna give this just a second to dry out a little bit before I flip it over and do another coat on the back. And while I'm doing that, since I've got a lot of the mint color on my brush, I'm gonna go ahead and clean my brush out a little bit and dry it thoroughly with the paper towel. While that's drying, let me show you some stuff that's going on in the studio. First of all, coming up Friday of this week and then a week from this Saturday, we're having Paint with Santa. And Paint with Santa is one of our favorite things to do in the studio with the kids. But like everything else this year, it's going to look a little bit different. We talked to Santa, and he was very disappointed not to be able to come into the studio. So what we're doing is we're providing an opportunity to Zoom with Santa. Each child that is signed up will get a little care package here. I don't know if you can see everything in it. It will come with paints. We've got this so chock full of stuff, though, that the paints are in a different bag. And they'll get the brushes, the paints that they need, a little treat, and then they'll get 3 ornaments to paint. I'm not really sure what's in here. There's all kinds of goodies. That might be a letter from Santa. So that's one thing coming up. That's coming up this Friday, and then a week from Saturday. And if you are interested in that, please hurry. You can sign up online. The thing is, we've got, between the 2 dates, I think we've got a little over a half a dozen spots left. We're doing this, Santa is doing a bunch of different studios all over the United States, some of our sister studios, and little boys and girls from each of those studios are participating. So they'll be able to Zoom with Santa and kids from all over. So that's one thing that's happening. That's Friday, this Friday evening, and then also Saturday, a week from Saturday. That's one thing that's happening. Now that looks pretty good and dry, or dry enough, so I'm gonna flip it, do my next coat of my turquoise. And then I'll do a little bit more selling for you guys. When you're doing the background, make sure, take a look and make sure that you have got it down around the edges pretty good, and also not gloppily down around the edges, if gloppily is a word. You don't want drips. If you should happen to get a drip, just kind of brush it with the brush to get rid of it as soon as you notice it. If you should happen to not notice it until it is too late, we can fix that too. So here's my second coat, and that hard spot was not as much of a problem this time. I am going to be like kind of gentle with my stroking in that area since I know that there's a hard spot there. There we go. Okay, rather than watch paint dry, here's a little more advertising for you. One of the joys of my job here is that I get to teach a lot of the classes. I love doing the adults, but honestly, the kids are just adorable, and it just was so sad to me when we had to close down because of the virus that I didn't get to see my kids. I had just had a workshop and I had others scheduled that didn't happen, and I had all the summer camps ready to go. And all of that stuff had to be changed. But, you know, we're creative, so we came up with different ways to do things, and the kids are absolutely amazing. Their skills in doing things virtually, it's just incredible compared to the adults. And with the kids' workshops, what I'll do is, in addition to doing it this way for the ones who'd like to watch it later, I also do a live Google Meet on a private page so that just anybody can't see it, but so that the kids, especially the ones who are non-readers, are able to you know, interact and do the projects. To that end, we are having this year, since a lot of people are not going to be traveling, something that I've been wanting to do for several years, and that's a winter break mini camp. And I say mini, but it's really honestly kind of the same size as, or the same amount of creativity as the summer camps. In our summer camp, or in our winter camp, we're having a, let's see, which one do I want to start with? We're having a Snowman theme. And I haven't titled it yet, and it's actually not up on the website yet, but please keep a lookout for it. We're expecting this one to sell out pretty well and pretty quickly. We're going to do an 8x10 canvas one day, and we're going to do a glass snowman, another snowman ornament another day. This one has a little beanie on it, and he had a pom-pom, but I don't know what I did with the pom-pom stuck here. But the kids will have an option of either doing a beanie or a long kind of tasseled hat on their little snowman. And there will be different hats, assorted hats. So that's one. This is probably my favorite project. I'm not quite finished this one, so I'm just going to show you the sample picture. This is a little, we're doing it as a ring dish, but it'll be 3 pinch pots, which is a technique a lot of the kids have done with me before. And we're going to join them together to make a little bowl that's kind of like a divided bowl that can be used for jewelry or little snacks. I went a little bit crazy with mine and gave my guy a scarf. You'll see him soon in our advertising, and also a 3-dimensional nose. So that's another day. Our last official project is we're going to do the melting snowman plate. So those are the 4 projects for that. Also with the summer camps, I like to sneak in a little bit of a bonus project. I'm not positive what that's going to be yet, but there will be an additional bonus project that we'll just do on the day that has the supplies that most closely overlap. So at least one bonus project with it. The only difference between our winter camp and our traditional summer virtual camps or otherwise is that I usually do sketchbooks and a bunch of other stuff with them, and I'm not so sure about that. I'm thinking we're going to skip the sketchbooks because there will be a lot of going-ons and new stuff in everybody's houses anyway. So I'm just loading my plate again for our last and final coat of this process. I've got my little boy blue again, slapping it on there. You guys can go ahead and do that also. Now I'm going to do that double loading, and again I'm going to put it down in a slightly different spot than I did last time, just to make that a little bit more subtle. And I'm going to go back and forth. There we go. Now I'm going to go just to the straight turquoise. This fade technique is one of my favorite things to do. It's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. I think the first coat of it you do is kind of terrifying, but after that it's kind of fun and easy, and it just looks really professional. All right, so there's my third coat. next time we're gonna have to just watch paint dry because I don't have anything else to tell you guys. Oh, actually I do. So in addition to all of the Christmas trees, the light up Christmas trees that we have, those classic kind of kitschy ones, we've got them in 3 different sizes in the store. We've got a 7-inch, I think it's a 10-inch, and then one that we just call extra large because it's massive. We've got those, but in addition to them, we've got some other pieces that might be fun, especially if you've already done a Christmas tree. Let me grab these. These are all available on our, you can check out the prices on our website. We've got this woody wagon, the old-timey station wagon. This one comes with a light kit like a Christmas tree for the little Christmas tree up here, and also the light snaps in the bottom. So we've got that one. Then we have this tree in a truck, and the truck looks like this, but I'm showing you this size because this one is smaller. The larger one comes with the light kit just like the wagon does. The smaller one is a lantern. I think the reason is that it would get too hot in this size if we tried to put a full-on light kit in there. So there's those. This one is proving quite popular in studios that got it before us. Kind of fun. If you're into gnomes, you can't really see how big he is. He stands over a foot tall, but there's a little gnome with a Christmas tree hat. And then I like this one because this one's for all of those people out there who say, oh, my aunt had a kiln in her basement and she always did pottery for Christmas. This is one of our new retro pieces. I'm pretty sure my aunt who had a kiln in her basement did this piece. We've got a couple other retro pieces. So that's just something to kind of wet your whistle there. Definitely explore our website, take a look at the stuff that we have in. We have a lot of fun holiday stuff in. I'm gonna flip this over, do that last coat. I've got a lot of turquoise on my brush, or mint rather, so I'm gonna rinse my brush. Dry it off well. And this is my last coat on the back. So I want to make sure that I don't miss any spots. This is going to get more exciting in a few minutes here. Alrighty. Okay. Now while that's drying, go ahead and rinse your brush pretty good because we're going to kind of switch gears here and do different colors. Move my little truck out of the way. When that's dry, we're going to flip it over. Actually, I'll let that sit for a second while I talk to you guys. So now we're going to do the top colors. And from here on out, I have to be pretty organized and not dawdle, just because the process goes a little better that way. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of talking beforehand. Let's see, how are we doing on time? 7:37, we're doing great. We're going to paint the top colors. On this one, I did a different blue that is lighter than the under blue, but in the same color family, kind of like if they were paint swatches for the house, they would be on the same card, definitely, because they go together nicely. I'm going to switch it up a little bit. I decided that I wished that I had done more white. So this time I'm gonna do white. At the top here I have the sweet pea that I had been talking about before. And I want to show you something just so you're aware of what will happen when this comes out. This one I did probably 2 coats if I'm remembering correctly. And you can see because this little boy blue was such a dark blue, and it looks like I may have only done 1 coat in this area. If I want that to be less subtle, if I don't want that little boy blue to show through, I'm gonna make sure that I put a little more paint on this time. And then this in the middle here is actually white. And then down at the bottom, it is the something blue, which is similar to the little boy blue, only lighter. So this is 2 coats of basically the same process that we just did. If I want it to be more, to stand out as more white, I would do in the middle especially, and more of the sweet pea at the top. I would probably do, instead of doing 2 coats, I would do 3 coats, because 3 coats will be a lot more opaque. Sometimes when I do the samples, I want to try out things just to see how they are going to look. And that was kind of the case there. So I'm going to flip this over. I've got my something blue down here, my turquoise in the middle, and then my mint on the top. I think I'm going to do the sweet pea over I'm trying to decide what I'd like to do this time. I think I'm going to do just a tiny bit of the sweet pea over the blue, and I'm going to do the white over the middle, and then I'm going to do a little bit of a lighter mint. Actually, you know what, I'm going to skip that lighter mint. I'm just going to do those 2 colors this time. If you would like to do 3 colors, by all means go ahead. The only difference is that when I switch from one color to the next, you'll do that twice. So I've got my sweet pea here. And I've got my white. And I want to start with white, but I want the white over the mint. So I'm going to just flip my plate around here. I've cleaned this brush out pretty good. I'm going to dip it in the white. And I'm going to start covering it. This has to be dry before I do that. And you can see, just like we always tell you, you know, that lighter colors don't show up as well on darker colors. That first coat, if I stopped there, this white would probably not even show up. You can definitely see the other color coming in through the bottom. So I'm going to work my way. Now I can switch to the sweet pea wherever I'd like, but I don't want to do it right in the middle. That tends to not look as interesting. I think I'm going to do it, I'm going to divide it up by thirds, and I'm just going to make 2/3 of it white. So even though I'm only using 2 colors, I'm just going to make 2/3 of it white. And I've got that first coat all the way across. If you've got, I love this plate. What is it called again? I can't remember what it's called. But I love this plate with the cute little scallopy edge. If you've got this one, it is a little bit torturous to get in the edges. I would suggest that I kind of experimented with that, and I think the spots that turned out the best were where I used the background color on the edges. So I'll show you at the end how to do that. So if you don't get in those little crevices, because like I said, it is kind of tough, don't worry about it, we'll fix that later. Okay, so now I'm double loading. I'm dipping in my white and my sweet pea. And those are so close, especially before they're fired, that even though one is white and one is technically a green, you can barely see the difference. So I'm going to do my coat over here, back and forth. If I should happen to get a big drip on the edge, I'm just going to kind of tap it with the brush, and that will that'll kind of spread it out a little bit. So after I do my blending in one, I'm going to go ahead and paint another one on here. Just in case yours ends up streaky like mine did on my sample. You can see it's a little bit streaky up here. Go ahead and do nice long strokes across. That way you can claim that you were the artist and you wanted it that way. Okay, so we're gonna let that one dry a little bit. And let's see. Oh, I see somebody has a comment. So if I want the back white, we should do 3 coats of white. Yes. Yeah, and if you didn't do that, like if you asked that question 15, 20 minutes ago and I'm just now seeing it, it's okay because you can always go back and do that later. If you don't have white, just give me a call tomorrow when I'm here at work and let me know, and I'll be able to, I have a fix for you, okay? So, letting that dry. This is a great time to go get a snack if you're a snacky person, because we do want to let that dry out a little bit. We've got some really, really cool, fun pieces in the studio for the holidays, and also just because if I were a more graceful person, I would take the phone off and take you guys on a little bit of a walking tour, but I'm not, so I'm going to just hang out here and talk. One of the lines that we're very excited about, at least those of us who are full-on geeks are very excited about, is we have got some Star Wars pieces in. We've got a BB-8 bank and a Darth Vader helmet mug and a Boba Fett helmet mug. Although I personally, if I am the lucky employee who gets to paint the Boba Fett, I'm going to paint him as the Mandalorian because I think I can pull that off from the way the mug is shaped. We've also got an R2-D2 bank and a Death Star box. So those would make fabulous Christmas presents, as would the winter break camp that I mentioned the last time we were watching paint dry. We've also got some really cool, we call them head vases. I don't know, I can't think of a more attractive name for them, but they're super cute, and I'll be posting some pictures of them tomorrow. I'll be posting them to our social media pages, but they can be painted as pretty much anything. We've got a really cool Frida Kahlo sample going, and we've also got an RBG sample, but they are also fun. And let's see, what else do we have that's new that I'm super excited about? Lots and lots of Christmas pieces. We've got some beautiful pieces like a soup tureen for a pumpkin-shaped soup tureen for Thanksgiving, still in stock. And what else do we have that's new and exciting? Oh, this is really pretty. This was going to be one of my summer camps, and I probably still will do it with the kids, hoping things are better this summer than last. But this is a standing altar. There's a Spanish word for it, but I will massacre that. And they look really pretty, and then you can add things like dried flowers and stuff in there. Let's see, what do we have happening here? I see, I need to tilt this up, I can't read all of these. So if, we got that, so got a thanks, a question, the etching. Is it supposed to go through one of the paint layers but not the other? Yes. I think that's Angela asking that question. Hi Angela, I'm glad you're here today. So right now we're not etching yet, but we're going to etch in another coat or two depending on our preferences. And yeah, when you do it, you're going to scratch through and you'll see it doesn't feel like it should work, but it actually does the majority of the time. If you look at this one here, you can see that I've got the light blue and the white on top. And then these turquoise lines, these dark turquoise lines, are made by scratching through with this scratching tool. And when you scratch, what ends up happening is the part that's wet will come off, but the part that is drier underneath does not come off as readily, and that's how you get the colors underneath. So my undercoat on this one, down at the bottom here was this dark turquoise, and then up at the top was one of the blues, the something blue that I used this time, or maybe the little boy blue, whichever one is darker. So yeah, that's exactly what will happen. You're only going to scratch through one color, one series of layers, and leave the undercoats in place. All right, this is dry enough to go ahead and do another coat. I'm going to dip it in that white. Working my way down. And for the sake of not having to watch paint dry again, I'm going to stop at this number of coats. If you would like yours more opaque, go ahead and do the third coat. Got to double load that one, almost forgot. Off centering it like I did before. There we go, got it painted. So I've got my two coats. I'm thinking most people will be happy with the two coats. So now I'm going to let that dry, but I'm not going to let it dry completely. And I am finished with that paintbrush. While I am, actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and be picky. I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to let that dry a little bit, and then I'm going to do one more. While I'm letting that dry a little bit, let's get prepared for the next step. You're going to want your stick, you're going to want your marker, and you're going to want your tissue paper tracing sheet. Now your tissue paper sheet is probably still on the traditional piece of photocopy paper that we taped it to make sure that it didn't jam in our photocopier, so that I didn't have to hand draw one for everybody in the class. So if yours is on the tissue paper, if yours is on the photocopy paper, carefully peel it off at the tape so that you have just the tissue paper. So you can see it's real thin and you can see through it. Because if it's not thin and see-through, like if it's still attached to your piece of photocopy paper like this, it's not going to work this next process. So that's dry enough for me to do my last coat real quick. I'm going to slap that on there, all the way across. Remember to do those nice, long, smooth coats, like I said. Do not go above a combined 6 coats on the top. So I've got 3 coats underneath, and then I've got 3 coats on top. Well, 2 or 3 coats on top. depending on my preference. There we go. Gotta let that dry a tiny bit, but not completely. And this is the step, when I watched the lady who did this process, who introduced me to this process, when I watched her do it, I knew she was doing etching, but when she got to this step, I was like, there is no way in the world that is gonna work. But it actually does. So we're gonna let this dry a little bit. I'm gonna turn my plate so that you can see my snowman upside right for you guys. So when it gets to that point where it still looks wet, like it's still got that darker color that it has when it's wet, but it's not, you know, soupy wet, then we're going to be ready for the next step. And I am almost there. I'm going to tilt up and see what this last comment was. Is it better to put the darker color on the bottom? Yes. Well, the darker color, you want to use darker colors on the underneath coats. If you mean the bottom, like the bottom of the plate this way, then it doesn't really matter. Like you could do this down here white and this up here a lighter blue, whatever you want. But the underneath colors, yeah, it's not imperative, but it tends to turn out a little bit more interesting if the lighter colors are on top. Okay? So, sort of, Angela, is the answer. It doesn't really matter, but if you want the lines to be darker, then the darker color has to be underneath. I think that time I said it right. So this is still wet, but it's not soupy wet now. So this is the part that I said I never thought would work. I'm going to sit my tissue paper down on there. And since it's a little wet, I'm going to have to work with it a tiny bit to get it laid out flat. Gently rub it with my finger so that it doesn't have any massive bubbles in it. Then I'm going to take my marker and I'm going to start to trace. And what happens, I'm going to peel this up so you can see it. What happens is the marker bleeds through, and this marker will burn off, so it doesn't matter what color marker you have, but it gets that design on the piece for us. Take your time with this step. If you press too hard, or your piece is wetter in some spots, which mine is, it might tear a little bit. It doesn't matter as long as you've got enough left to do what you need to do, because this tissue paper is not going to be something we need to save. Yep, I really ripped my little birdie face there. I'm going to trace this whole thing. And here's my trimmer getting the best of me. This is going to be beautiful. It's a good thing this is burning off because it's not really going to be beautiful. You guys probably would be more comfortable doing your snowman upside right, but so that you see it upside right, I'm going to go ahead and do mine upside down. The wind is out there blowing our outdoor lights all over the place. I hear them snapping against the glass. Sounds like Frosty really is coming to town. I don't want to press super hard because when I press super hard, it can dig down into the paint, especially since the paint is still wet to damp. So I'm going to be sure I trace all of it. Okay, and once you've got it done, carefully grab one of your corners and just kind of pull it up. Now some of you might see where the edge of the paper was. Don't worry about that. That is something that once it comes back to the studio, we can just lightly do what we call a finger sand, which is when the piece is completely dry, we just kind of brush it a little bit with our finger to get rid of any big lumps. Now I'm ready for the process. And you can see this is still wet, but it's getting drier by the minute. So I'm gonna have to do at least as much working as I'm doing talking. Take your stick, hold it like a pencil. You can rest your hand on your piece lightly if you want to, and start to scratch through. And you can see my turquoise is coming up there. Let me tilt you guys down even further so you can see a little bit better. And the point does it nice and thin. If I want some areas to be thicker, I can flip it over and use the other side. And that'll give me a darker or a wider edge. Now you see all these little crumbs. In the original etching technique that I learned how to do, those crumbs would have been dust everywhere, which, especially if you do a lighter color on top, kind of messed with the design a little bit because it created streaks in the design. This way I can just take it and just kind of gently rub it. The makeup wearing women amongst us will notice what I was doing there. I'm using my middle finger, not because I'm trying to be rude, but because your middle finger is not as strong. So like they always tell you to put makeup on with that finger because the application is a little bit more subtle and gentle. So I'm going to widen some of these up a little bit, and I'm just going to work my way around, doing all of them. Now the part that I have done in marker was originally our plan for all we were going to do. And then we weren't satisfied when I was done it. My boss and I both are kind of design-wise, more is more kind of people. And so we didn't think that was exciting enough. I kind of had that feeling, but it was actually kind of fun to watch her try to figure out a polite way of telling me that she didn't think I was finished. So a couple things we did. I'm kind of working mine fast. You guys take your time, do it at whatever speed you're comfortable with. I'm going to trace my snow shovel. Now my snow shovel in my tracing, because I ended up a little bit crooked, the original design has them not touching. You want them to either not touch or to overlap a lot. Like mine right now, it looks like they're almost touching, and that looks kind of weird. So I'm just gonna back this edge up just a little bit from my marker line. Like I said, the marker line is gonna disappear, so it doesn't matter. Every once in a while, I'm going to tilt it and dust it, and those of you guys at home want to dust it out of the area where you're sitting the plate, otherwise you're going to get those little crumbs on your plate, which could be a cool effect, but if it's not what you're going for, then you don't want to do that. Okay, and you can see that I've got some of my lines happening right here. I'm going to turn this around so I can finish it a little quicker. I'm going to do his little eyes. And his other little eye. I'm going to do his little nose. That little line above his eye. His mouth. Do his snow shovel handle. Finish out his scarf. That's my basic design, and I honestly, when I did this, thought that was going to be finished, but first of all, doing this is kind of fun, so I wanted to do a little more, and also it doesn't look that exciting, so I'm going to show you some of the things that I did. One thing was I added stripes scratched in on my scarf, and I did my stripes long ways, but you could do your stripes in whatever direction. Now look at that, a big chip just popped off on that one. You can see right there, a big chip. That's okay. Like Bob Ross says, no such thing as mistakes, just happy accidents. And I actually really like the way the colors coming through looks, so that's good. See, that is not, we're not treating that like a mistake. So that's one thing you can do to kind of jazz it up a little bit. Another thing you can do is, like I said, make some of your lines thicker by using the other end of your tool. If you do it all on one side, that will make it look like a shadow. If you do it on the underside of shapes and on one side of your design or your drawing, that will make it look like a shadow. Every once in a while you want to clean off the end of your stick, and you want to clean the little crumbs off of your plate. So that's one thing I did to make it more interesting. Now some of you guys, depending on the speed you worked and how thick your paint is, your paint may be starting to dry. That is what your sponge is for. Give me 1 second and I will show you what to do with that. Okay, so if you do like I did and put your hand in your crumbs, you may end up with some of your color stuck to it. If you can gently rub it off with your finger, that's great. If it doesn't come off, just consider it part of the design. I have a couple spots like that on my original and it looks fine. It's the kind of thing that we as the artist will see, but anybody looking at your plate will not even notice. Or if they do, they'll think you did it on purpose. So, last thing I need to show you for this part of it is how to make it look a little more interesting, and also what to do if your plate starts to dry out. If your plate starts to dry out, you're going to take your sponge, you're going to dip it in, and you guys have like a quarter of the size of the sponge I have. It's okay, it doesn't really matter. But you're going to get it wet, wring it out over the bowl, excuse me, and you can tap it down, and that will give you a little bit of that wet. If you just tap gently, you can see that no paint is even coming up on my sponge. Okay, because I'm making sure that I wring it out so my sponge is not super wet is the first thing, and also I'm kind of pressing gently. So now I can do some more working. If I have any of these lines to finish up, I can. If I want to add anything else, I can. Up here, I did on the original, I did your name here. So you could do your family name here. You could do, we wish you a Merry Christmas. Trust me, this does say your name here. I did the whole last video and I'm writing you guys notes and stuff, and then I realized watching it that this is the selfie cam for the live video, so it's impossible to read unless you're Da Vinci and you're used to reading backwards and writing backwards. But you can write whatever you want in this space, or nothing at all. It's totally up to you. While this is still wet, another thing that is fun to do is to just go back and have fun with the technique and put some snowflakes in there. I did simple retro snowflakes. I did an X, and sometimes I just stopped at the X, but sometimes I put another line in the middle. That's one kind of snowflake I did. Another kind of snowflake I did had, let's see, what else did I do? Was I creative and did 6-pointed ones? Yeah, I did a couple 6-pointed ones. I was going for kind of a retro vibe, so I didn't worry about making them exactly symmetrical. I was kind of looking at those boomerang prints that used to be on tabletops, my kitchen table as a kid. So I did some like that. Made some small ones that were just little tiny X's, some larger ones that were massive. And I kind of worked my way around the design around the plate, filling up my negative space with that. Because the point of this project is the sgraffito technique or the wet etching. So, you know, you want to have fun with it. You don't want to just stop at the bare minimum. So this one's a little lopsided, so I'm just going to add a little bit here. Trust yourself with this. Freehanding it is fine. Almost none of my snowflakes are actually perfect little snowflakes on my sample. You'll want to do some that kind of overlap, so don't scratch into your snowman, but make it look like it's falling behind your snowman by bringing that center axis over this way a little bit. See what I did there? Like this snowflake actually would normally come out to about here, but I stopped so that it would look like it was behind my snowman. Another thing you can do if you would like, the lady that I watched actually left some of her little crumbs on the piece, and that gives it kind of a three-dimensional piece effect when they stick to it. So if you like that, you can leave it like that. They will stick as long as they're wet when you're doing it. But another thing you can do is add little dots on your snowflakes, either attached or sticking out a little bit from them. You know, no two snowflakes are the same, but on my design here, a lot of them are actually kind of the same. So I'm just going to fill that up with snowflakes. I can do as many or as few as I want. I think this one actually kind of looks good with the amount I have. one here I went a little bit crazier with. It was a bigger piece, so I definitely had room for a lot more snowflakes. And that is the last of it. I'm going to show you a little bit of the finish work that I did, but you guys probably could figure that out on your own. When I've got this wet etching technique the way I like it, by the way, don't forget that you can dip this in the water and pat it on there to get it wet again if it should happen to dry out on you. If more is chipping than you want, it's probably getting a little too dry. So the last step is taking my accent colors like my red and adding them where I want them. Again, with the nice brushes. So I did some accents. I like to do it on, you can do whatever you like, but I like to do it on the white part because I want that sgraffito to show through, that wet etching to show through. All right, so I did some here. Let me tilt this up because I think I see some more comments happening. Yeah, okay, so we're good with all of those. I'm gonna tilt it back down again. There we go. So some people like to really go crazy with this final step and do a lot of additional detail, and some people just want to do a little bit here and there. Whichever you would like is, you know, of course, what you should do because you are the artist. I will say that I stopped at one coat with this. And part of the reason that I did that was because I kind of like that brushy look on top of the other. It helped the wet etching part stand out, and part of it is because if I did 3 coats to make it truly solid, that would be 9 coats, and then I'm kind of well into the range of risking peel back, so I didn't want that happening. So I'm doing a little bit of detail work on this guy here. And the last little bit of detail work is to go back to those original colors that I had, the darker underneath colors. And again, this is optional. I'm choosing the mint that I had at the bottom and the turquoise that I had in the middle, and I'm going to use them near the top to paint a few snowflakes in. So I think I'm actually going to use the mint because the mint is different than what is under there, so that'll give me a little bit more depth of color. So I'm just going to paint a couple snowflakes in. Oh, it looks like this one's going to be a 6-pointed one. Gonna do some little dots on that. You can use the bristles on your paintbrush to do the dots on this step, or you can use the point of your paintbrush, the handle point. That will make a nice dot. It'll make kind of a big dot, so I'm not going to do it on that tiny snowflake, but if you can see there, actually that's not too big. I guess I will risk it. Okay, ready? Here we go. If I pressed harder, I would get a much bigger dot, but this is a small snowflake, so I want smaller dots. So I'm going to do a couple more of those mint ones. I think I want another mint one right here, kind of overlapping with the scarf. That's it. I think I need one over here.
wherever you think they need to be for balance's sake. So this technique is definitely not as dusty as the dry sgraffito is, but if you're like me and you end up accidentally breathing in some of that stuff, first of all, try not to, but if you do breathe in the dust, you might want to stop for a little bit of a drink. Okay, so I've got my snowflakes in here. Another thing that I did, is I just did a little bit of pinstriping in my, I'm going to turn it this way so I don't drag my hand through it. Did a little bit of pinstriping on the inside of my snow shovel because I wanted to. You could also, instead of carving your name into the snow shovel, you could also paint it in. Whatever you want to do. I feel like I may have gone too far there, so I'm going to stop. Let's see what we're doing time-wise. 8:19, that is perfect. So that is finished. If you'd like to, you can sign your piece here. You can sign it on the back. Definitely sign it somewhere. We're all going to have pieces that look similar except for the color differences. One last thing, when you're finished your piece, maybe tomorrow or later tonight, like I said, you can still paint more of that in if you'd like. You're gonna notice this edge is a little sloppy. First of all, gently do this. That'll get rid of any bumps. If it's a little bit bumpy, that's okay. It'll smooth out in the firing process, but if you've got a big old drip, you want to kind of rub it with your finger to get rid of that. Now, to clean up that edge, because my paint kind of went everywhere, you know, you can, especially on this edge, you can see you've got the light from the top and the dark from the bottom. I'm going to take my sponge, make sure it's clean, dip it in the color that I did the back of the plate, and I'm going to gently tap along this edge. And that actually works better, getting a straight line, believe it or not, than painstakingly going along with a brush trying to get a straight line. But that'll straighten out your line for you. What I did was I'm not sure if I was doing that on screen, I was concentrating on what I was doing. Just kind of tapping it along the edge. I've loaded it up with paint. I haven't gone crazy loading it, but I have loaded it. The paint color from the background, and I'm tapping it along the edge. And that'll give me a nice smooth edge. Okay? So thank you guys for joining us tonight. Don't forget to put your name on the piece. It'll be about a week from whenever you get it back to us that we get it back to you. Very rarely, because this process is so thick and because of the pills, there will be spots that are peeled back. I actually had one on this piece. I can't find it now, so I won't torture you making you watch. But the paint went down to the raw pottery. And if that happens, it's not any big deal. We'll just hit a little bit of clear paint on there, or clear glaze on there for you, and send it back through the kiln. So if, you know, we tell you that we need to refire yours, that's probably what happened. It's not a big deal. And your piece will still turn out beautiful. So there is our wet etching process. You can see this is drying out. If I wanted to do some more work on it, I would go ahead and dip the sponge in the water and pat it on there and do it again. If tomorrow you wake up, you look at your piece and you think, oh, I should have done a little bit more scratching here or there or whatever, you can do that. Just be really careful of the spots like this that you overpainted. Because tapping on them and then tapping somewhere else, you could end up transferring the paint. But like if I decided I wanted a snowflake over here where there is no additional paint, or I just wanted to clean up one of my lines, I could dip my clean sponge in the water and tap that area and go ahead and scratch in another one. Okay? Like we can pretend this is tomorrow. I can still scratch one in here. And that will re-wet the piece. and I'll be able to do another one. Alrighty, there we have it. And my coworkers laugh at me because I say goodbye like half a dozen times before I actually leave work. And apparently I do that on the videos too. So really, truly this time, goodbye. Have a happy holiday. We look forward to seeing your pieces in the studio for us to fire. Bye-bye.